Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media, coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
I'm Dion Mitchell here with my co-host Mehul Angeria. On this episode of Crime Redefined, we are very excited to have the honor of speaking with Fernando Bermudez. Fernando triumphed over a wrongful conviction that took 18 years of his life away.
When Fernando was 21 back in 1991, he was arrested for a crime he did not commit. An altercation in a Greenwich Village nightclub between some Hispanic and Black teenagers resulted in 16-year-old Raymond Blount being punched by Efren Lopez. Lopez then recruited his friend Luis Munoz, aka Wulu, to help him exact revenge. When Raymond Blount emerged from the nightclub that night, he was shot dead.
Meanwhile, Mr. Bermudez was nowhere near the nightclub and had a seemingly airtight alibi. Like so many of these horrifying cases, a badly flawed eyewitness ID procedure sealed Fernando's fate. This despite a video existing of Efren Lopez identifying Wulu as the shooter to the police.
After the trial, the eyewitnesses recanted their ID and stated that they were pressured by police to identify Bermudez. However, Fernando Bermudez had to lodge 11 appeals before finally being found actually innocent in 2009. After a hard-fought battle lasting years after this finding of actual innocence, Fernando prevailed on lawsuits against the city and state of New York and finally was provided the needed compensation for him to attempt to rebuild his broken life.
Well, that's the background you need to fully appreciate the harrowing story that we are now going to hear firsthand from a very courageous and inspiring man.
Fernando, it's an honor to speak with you today.
We're so excited to have you. Your story is really amazing.
And thank you so much for coming on Crime Redefined to share it with us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I want to take you back to August of 1991, before the nightmare began. So give us a picture of what your life was like and kind of what your hopes and dreams were at that time before you were arrested.
Yes, on August 6, 1991, I was a very happy fellow, in fact, because I was slated to begin college that September of 1991. I was going to enter the medical profession. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to atone for past mistakes. I just wanted to make my parents proud, and I wanted employment stability. And so I envisioned a career in medicine, and I was set to enroll when suddenly, while enjoying the night out with my friends, my three friends who were with me in my father's newly salvaged purchased car, we were just driving around enjoying ourselves. But 2 days later, I'm arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I had no knowledge of it. I didn't even know why I was being arrested.
So I'm gonna stop you there just because we were gonna hit you on that next. So on the night that Raymond Blount was murdered, you're saying you were with some friends in a car that your father just bought you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And then, so now you get arrested. Take us through that day and talk about the arrest and the booking and how you were treated and what you were feeling.
Right. Well, I was 2 days later with my brother. We were two female companions, and we drove in front of my parents' home. This is Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and we drove there, and all of a sudden, cops descended on us with guns drawn, and they placed guns all over the car, and they told everybody to get out. And we were just shocked. We thought it was like a carjacking, actually, or something, because they didn't identify themselves immediately. And so we got out the car, and the next thing I know, I'm taken away. My mother is screaming, crying from the second floor story where we all lived with my three other siblings and my father as well. And I was just stunned. I was taken away, and I would never see my old home until many, many years later, 18 years later. But before that, I was brought to the precinct, and I was interrogated for 10 hours. And I told them forwards, backwards, sideways, everything I knew about the night of August 3rd and 4th, in which there was an individual, Raymond Blount, who had gotten shot, or after an altercation spilled out from a nightclub incident, and it spilled out into the streets. And so I was in the precinct, and then hours into the interrogation, they dropped the bomb on me and said that I was being charged with murder. And this is after I told them my whereabouts, what I was wearing, who I was with, that I had never been inside no nightclub. And I was just stunned. I was just stunned. I really thought that it would be as simple as telling the prosecutor and police where I had been, what I had done, and everything. And it would be that simple, but it got much more complicated than that.
Who were you with, Fernando?
I was with my friend Leonard Macaluso, who was a childhood friend of mine. I was with another guy named Euclides and another guy named Ricardo. So we were all just driving around, enjoying. It was a great night for us, actually.
So I should ask you, Fernando, how old were you at this time?
I was 22
wow.
at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so you're with, I'm assuming that your friends all stood up for you and said that you were with them. Tell us how the eyewitness identification of you came about, and then what went wrong during that process.
Sure. Well, after a while, I told them, I said, after a few hours, not only did I say I was hungry, because I really was, but more than that, I was in shock. And I said, may I speak to my mother? And they said, no, if you participate in a lineup, then you could talk to your mother. I said, okay. I thought I had nothing to fear, because I just felt, again, if I tell the truth and I comply, everything will be simple. I'll be able to go home and get my food.
Everything that your parents tell you to do, right? Tell the truth, be straight, be honest. And you thought, okay, I'm in good shape.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really believe that. And it's particularly, in my private school upbringing, where, we pledged allegiance to the flag every day before class started. And all this was ingrained in me, that the American system would work. But after that, I sat in a lineup, and I was a little shocked, because I always envisioned that lineups were things that people stood up and held cards or numbers and walked in the room or something. But it wasn't like that. I sat down with other police officers who were next to me in plain clothes. I knew they were police officers because I could tell their chains. They had the ball-bearing chains with the police shields underneath their shirts, but you could see it. But I didn't think much of that. I just said, hey, just sit down. I didn't think at that time that because I was 6'2", 220, that would be a huge discrepancy. And so later I go back into the interrogation room, and the prosecutor says that people picked me out the lineup. And I was like, what? I said, this is crazy. This is a mistake. And again, I continued telling him where I was. And 10 hours would pass. And because I wouldn't admit guilt or confess or anything, I was then sent to Rikers Island.
Was there any other evidence linking you to the shooting at that point?
No, there was nothing at all.
Just pure eyewitness accounts.
Yes, the so-called eyewitnesses. Mm-hmm.
Well, Fernando, to this day, Rikers Island is a notorious hellhole. How long were you there awaiting trial? And just tell us some of the miserable experiences you had while you were waiting for trial.
Right. Well, Rikers Island, at that point, I entered Rikers Island in the summer of 1991, and it had just been simmering after a riot there the year before. So that kind of carried over into the tension of that summer, because people were still talking about it. And so I didn't have to see or feel it. I didn't have to feel it. I saw it for myself, I should say. And it was something where immediately I entered Rikers, and I was afraid. I'm not going to lie. I was a big dude, but there was just a lot of things going on, particularly in control over the phone. So they had two phones, and it was cut across racial lines. One group couldn't use the phone over the other. And if you trespassed or even tried to use the phone without permission, no matter what group, you'd get beat up, cut. Any number of things can happen. So it was that type of situation of, trying to reach out and touch someone, your family member. So, I took to letter writing, and unfortunately I was fortunate to get some phone time and things like that. But it was definitely a continuous tension-filled atmosphere where, there was some good people that I met, but mostly people were just angry and frustrated. And because they hadn't even been sentenced yet, there was a lot of violence going on. There was just, the level of despair there was so thick.
So talk to us, Fernando, about some of the prosecutorial misconduct that was going on even before your trial, and specifically with the regards to the issue of Efrain Lopez and Wulu?
Yes. Well, we were able to find out later after the trial, but not before, not even during, because the prosecutor, starting with him, James G. Rodriguez from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who knew better. He was a veteran already at this. And yes, he was dealing with his about third homicide case of that night. He would later testify, but that's no excuse to flout the law. How did he flout the law? Well, when Efrain Lopez came into contact with him, let me backtrack for a moment. Before
Sure.
The prosecutor, it was the detective Daniel Mazanova, and I was his second homicide case. Incidentally, his first homicide case of that Greenwich Village area would be overturned. We were just months apart. It was another Latino male who was caught by them, and then he was later proven innocent as well. But during this time, I was the next case months later. And so this detective, he took a picture of mugshot pictures, and he showed it to this guy named Efrain Lopez, who would be the state star witness. He was 16-year-old, who had absconded for work release program. And he had told the police and prosecutor that this guy, Wulu or Lewis, and all this would be around this West neighborhood, 90s neighborhood, and he was a drug dealer and so forth, but they ignored all of that. They ignored this in part because the first illegal thing that happened was that the witnesses, 4 teenage witnesses and others, were placed in a room and were allowed to share pictures together. So one young lady picked up my picture and she said I look cute or whatever, and from then on she shared it with the other witnesses. So then they all said, yeah, it's probably him or whatever, and they all agreed on that. And they took my picture after that illegal identification procedure, and they showed it to Lopez about a day later. And Lopez says, you could see the look on Lopez's face in the video. He's like dumbfounded. Like, I told you everything of who this person was, but then when they showed him, isn't this him? Isn't this him? You could see his look like, huh? But he knew, street savvy as he was, that to get himself out of accessory to murder charges, he would pick me. At the behest of the detectives, and that's what he did. So now, after this is done, the prosecutor tells him, okay, now you're going to testify, and he threatened him with accessory to murder charges if he didn't tell the truth. So based upon the lie that he already started telling, he went with that, and then my fate was sealed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the fix was in, and you weren't going anywhere for a very, very long time.
That's right.
Tell me about the jury selection. So when the jury selection was set for your trial, what was the racial makeup of the panel? Do you remember?
Right. Yes, I do. You had a quite. Let me see. You had about maybe 6 white jurors. You had an Asian, I think, and then you had about 3 blacks, and then you had about 2 Latinos. But those Latinos were immediately disqualified throughout. Like the prosecutor used his preemptive rights.
Oh, right.
To be able to knock off the Latino jurors. And I was like, what's going on here? And so at the end, I ended up with no Latino jurors. He struck them all.
You must just feel like just every day it's just another chip that they're kind of taking away the foundation of you actually having a fair trial in this, right?
Yeah, and at that time, I didn't know it would be a potential violation of the law if taken to the extreme under Batson versus Kentucky. That's a violation of the Constitution. But it just felt weird. It felt like, wait a minute, why am I not? And then a Latino juror later, he was waiting, like he wanted to hear this case. He would tell my father later, he was waiting for my dad to come out. He says, I really wanted to see this case, like he told my dad. And I was like, man, me and my dad would always talk about that. What if that juror had stayed? What had he blocked? The lies that were unraveling? I don't know.
It must have felt like, as you're describing this and I'm listening, it's just really an amazing story. It must have felt a little bit like a Twilight Zone episode. Is this really happening? Am I awake, or is this a nightmare?
Yeah, it really was, especially when I hit Rikers and I had to endure all that type of stuff going on there, the bus rides, the brutality, people locked up versus each other, the COs against the people locked up. It was barbaric at times to see people stabbed with so many.
I can't imagine. I cannot.
It does something to you. It does something to your spirit to see someone hurt that way.
Just tell me about the relationships between the Black and the Latino communities in Manhattan at that time.
Well, in Manhattan, I could tell you Manhattan, it was one where, you have Harlem, and then you have Harlem where the majority of people there at that time were of color and so forth. But then you have Washington Heights where it starts turning Dominican and Latino. It could be Puerto Rican, it could be, but mostly once you hit Washington Heights, we're talking a great connection of Dominican or Latino people there. And so through this, people know each other from the streets. I mean, people are drug dealers moving around in cars. It was a common thing for people to know each other by the car that they drove. Oh, homie drives this car, he drives that car. That's how it was in prison. Like I learned, that's how people were talking. It was like, yo, he drove this. You try to identify. So people knew each other. However, there was still that racial barrier that to an extent existed. But that grew worse inside prison because now, despite no alliances on the street, people, whatever, however they knew each other through interracial relationships, whatever. Now in prison, it changed. It might have helped, but it complicated it because that phone was one for the Latinos and one for the Black.
When you were in jail during the trial, being transported back and forth to the courtroom every day, what was the routine like, and what did you have to endure before you even went to court and went through all that, draining mental activity of court? I mean, what were some of the sights and smells, that you had to endure?
Sure. Well, when you're in Rikers, for example, that's where I did the majority of my court trips to. Mm-hmm. You get woken up very early, usually with a flashlight in your face, and then you're told to wake up. The guy has your card. He's telling you got to go to court. Sometimes you don't even know you got to go to court, but usually you know you got to go to court. And so you get a little bag, then you're ushered with the group of court people that are going into a bullpen. Well, first you go to the mess hall and you eat in a crowded, loud mess hall where the cops are hitting the metal railings, and it creates a tuning fork effect. Like with the and it's like, wow, because I guess people are making too much noise. So that's the way of calming everybody down. Shut up, like that. And so now you're herded into a crowded bullpen, and that's what's called bullpen therapy. It's almost like that, a throwback to that time in the Inquisition where they would put you in a sort of room and make you confess. And but in this case, people confess because they were so tired of, or they would take plea bargains, I just say, because they wanted to get out of prison. That's how bad those conditions were.
Breaking you
down, because not only after that long bullpen therapy where there's fights, there's just crowded, there's a standing room only. Then you put on a bus, shackled with someone else. So now you shackle into the bus, and then you go to, once you get to the courtrooms, then you're put in a detention center, not a detention center, in a holding pen where the same thing is happening. You're waiting for your court now to see the judge. And then you got to wait to go back. So if you miss your bus, you can come back at midnight, all tired, smelly. So you're coming back with even a smell on you that, in my opinion, is one of sweat, fear, anxiety, just an unsavory collection of just people, some who don't even care about bathing. So you're all in there. And so it's just a bad smell. I mean, one of fear. You could smell fear sometimes.
Fernando, when you finally got to the courtroom during your trial, were you able to wear a suit, or did you have to wear the prison uniform?
When it came to my trial, I was then allowed to receive a suit and some nice clothing for my appearances. And I would get it at Rikers Island, then I would wear it to the bullpen and all that stuff like that on the bus. And so, it would be like a moment where I would feel a little
normal for a bit.
Yeah, a little bit normal because, in the prison visits, you have to wear these great jumpsuits and things like that. And that would mean a lot to me because later on in upstate prison, you would just wear mostly green clothing.
I want to frame this for you a little bit, and so you can really, for our listeners, set this up for us. I want to know your thoughts and emotions during that awful window of time from when you learned a verdict had been reached and the time it's read aloud in court.
Yes. Well, for me, it was a palpable, unmistakable level of tension that to me was like almost like water dripping out of a faucet and it sounding louder than it should. Time just dripping that way, the clock almost as if it's chained, and you're just waiting. You're waiting for the decision that is going to change your life for better or worse, because that's what it had been up until that point. After over a year at Rikers, my trial began actually in like 6 months because I wanted to get out of it so bad that I told them, hey, give me a speedy trial. It's my constitutional right. I didn't know that then, but my lawyer said, you want a speedy? I said, yeah, I want a speedy trial. I'm telling the truth. So there should be I want speedy justice. Well, it didn't turn out that way. I would end up at Rikers for over a year. And then I would, let me rephrase the question. During that, in terms of for the verdict. And so when I got the verdict, it was a very, like, you get into the room, you walk, and you're under control. This is not like you could just gallivant in there. No, you're controlled, you're in handcuffs, and then you sit down, they make you sit down, and then you wait. And then they reveal that, we the jury, the state of New York, find you guilty. That thing reverberated throughout my psyche, my very being. Particularly, I was in shock, but what the pain that was real for me, undeniable, was seeing my family crying, falling on the floor in the courtroom, and the gavel pounding furiously, and the judge yelling to my family and all the audience there to calm down, as if this doesn't mean anything, or we're supposed to compose ourselves, even though we knew that as the trial unraveled, because as it did unravel, we were seeing this guy from Lopez was clearly lying, because he was naming me someone I wasn't. And I was like, yo, this guy is like, I'm not even this person. I don't even live in this neighborhood where he's saying. So you know what I mean? It was that outrage that at the end you expect a better conclusion, but you're paralyzed with a shock.
So I understand, though, Fernando, that after the verdict hit, there was a gap of time, of course, before the sentencing. And wasn't there some ray of hope that emerged in terms of some new information?
Yes, there actually was, because as a result of the trial, we were able to see the lies that Efraim Lopez told. Up until then, we didn't know all these key leads because, for example, the prosecutor turned over boxes of material, of evidence, just days into my jury deliberation. Like, once my jury deliberated, then that's when he turned it over.
Wow.
Like, right before my trial actually began, it was like Martin Luther King holiday, that right after that, he turned it over. It was like, how can we review this? It was weird. But the point is that the prosecutor, he could have helped me with this by sharing it with the defense early on, and he didn't do that. But I think I lost you on the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you hit it exactly. So I was just wondering, it sounded like after the verdict, that you learned some stuff that maybe should come before the court before you were actually sentenced.
Got it. Okay, so right. So then that's what happened. So as a result of us investigating the boxes of evidence, the redacted videotape, because it was a videotape where Efraim Lopez is talking and he's telling the police and prosecutor he lives in this area, but then it's blocked. He goes by the name of, and in some instances, it's blocked. And we were like, what? And then when we got the other redact down, he's saying his name is Lou. His name is Lewis. Why was this stuff redacted out of the version that the jury saw? So based on this and the testimony that emerged from Efraim Lopez and other witnesses as well, we were able to then begin an investigation into the West 90s neighborhood. A former homicide detective who already had been working on my case, named Mike Gaynor, he started working on my case pro bono, and then he got an attorney, and then they started investigating it. All these witnesses were yearning to tell the truth early on. They said they were pressured, coerced, threatened. Some had made deals with the prosecutor that in exchange for their testimony, their own charges would be dropped. And we found the paperwork on this. We were like, whoa, this happened December 19th, right before the trial, that these charges were dropped. We found all this too late, and they just tried to cover it up so good. It was so difficult.
It sounds like if any one of those would have come to light at the trial, you would have walked that day.
Well, yeah, it would have helped cast doubt on the eyewitnesses'
Right.
testimony, because these were all teenagers, but again, they had criminal records that were dropped. Ephraim Lopez, in particular, as you know, he had accessory to murder charges.
Right.
He would have told maybe on his mother if it meant getting out. I hope he wouldn't, but maybe, And so, he certainly was a Pinocchio in court. The more lies he told, I could almost touch his nose as he testified. I mean, I could almost tickle it. I'll pull it off if I could.
I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with how you handled this because I don't know if I would have lasted a second, to be honest with you.
Well, sir, that's what my father says. He said, man, I would have been screwed. My father had a few outbursts in the court. And he said, I didn't want to mess up my proceedings, man. I'm dealing with enough
you're trying to walk on eggshells. Yeah. And not the boat at all. Like, Dad.
Right. Yeah. And that will be tested later. I'll tell you later as to how eventually I ended up in the federal court proceedings 10 years later, actually. On my daughter's first birthday, we went to federal court. And they mistakenly put me in a bullpen with Ephraim Lopez. I don't know how that happened, but after, I couldn't believe it. It was like a sign. Are you going to mess up your case or not? And they put me after he testified in court and told the truth, why he lied and all that. And I had a moment to beat him up right there, and I didn't. I'm not going to mess up my proceeding. We got another round to go this afternoon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. It seems like at every turn they're just trying to, get those cinder blocks around your feet bigger and bigger when they already had it. I mean, that's the definition of a fixed game. I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're sentenced. They've read the verdict, and you touched on a couple of these earlier. But I'd love to know if there's any other some of the horrors that you endured at Sing Sing, and then how did you cope with them?
Right. Well, Sing Sing will come much later. Rikers was my city jail detention, right, where then eventually I would go upstate, Elmira, Southport, Sullivan, Shawangunk, and then Sing Sing. Sing Sing was the place I was eventually released from. But to quickly answer your question, we thought that the evidence that we were gathering through the investigation would stop the verdict. Or the sentencing, I should say, not the verdict, because the verdict already came, but it didn't. The judge didn't want to test it. He didn't want to hear anymore because it was coming in piecemeal through the investigation that the lawyers were conducting. And then I got sentenced. So again, now I go upstate. My life begins one of learning the law, trying to get out of there, and filing appeal after appeal until it ended up with my 11th at Sing Sing, where finally I was exonerated.
I want to switch to something. So basically kind of getting, engrossed and working on your own case that helped you kind of cope with your surroundings. But I want to get on to a couple of positive things. Tell me how you met your wife.
Oh, yes. Well, my wife, who just celebrated her birthday yesterday, and we're under quarantine.
Crime redefined to her.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, team. I appreciate it. I will credit her. We had her birthday yesterday in quarantine, and I met my wife early on in my prison experience. She found me. She investigated my case after seeing it on TV. She had a big burden over seeing my father on a crusade. And then she was touched by the case, and she started researching it, was working for the phone company at the time, and finally found me after so many tries. As we connected, she wrote me a letter. We courted, and we got married. We started having children in prison through conjugal visits.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Did she help you? I understand that you got into fashion, which is crazy, while you were in prison. Those two things usually don't go together. So you get into, but this is America. So you get into fashion business. Tell me how you got that clothing company started, and then did she work with you on that while you were inside?
Absolutely. I mean, I had studied business in prison. I was always trying to study personal finance, and because I was earning 38 cents an hour. So for me, I would try to stretch that money. I would save it. I would starve myself to save that money by sneaking food out the prison kitchen where I worked, and sometimes with a wink, the officers would give me extra food to take home, and that would save me money. And so I started, I said, what can I do? So I took the money, I gave it to my wife, and I said, listen, go buy clothes wholesale, wherever you can find them, and I'll retail them in here in prison, because there was a big demand for clothing. The catalogs had too many restrictions. They would send the wrong sizes. It was just a lot of complications with guys getting the right sizing and colors and variety. And I started filling that niche. And so my wife would come and drop off the clothing in prison visits, and so would my mother. And so And I would get all these clothing and I would just sell them and I would barter them for cigarettes, even though I didn't smoke, detergent, stamps, cosmetics, soap, toothpaste, and I would send it to my wife in lump sum. And then she would use that not only to offset her economy, throughout the troubled times of us trying to survive as a family, but also it would help her pay off some bills because she would liquidate packs of cigarettes and stuff like that. And that helped, every little bit helped because it was difficult. Really, by virtue of my wrongful conviction, we became a dysfunctional family, not only with my parents on that end, but also now the over 1.5 million, I think, households without two parents in them. Right. In America, and that forced us to live that experience. She was a single mother in one sense without my help.
Fernando, when you were in state prison, I'm curious about this. We know some of the horrors about the other inmates and how they behave, but what about the guards themselves? What kind of abuse and corruption did you witness by the actual prison guards?
Yes. Well, I'm sad to say that, you would think that under some condition of already us being punished and incarcerated, that would be enough. But unfortunately, there's other layers. And on one end, there's the layer of people being frustrated and angry and combustible while in prison by virtue of, in some cases, their crime or their attitude. But in other instances, there's also just the aspect of trying to survive. So the correctional officers have the responsibility of 3 C's: care, custody, and control. They fail in all this when they begin abusing, people who are incarcerated. And it could be just something as simple as because you didn't get your rights met, the adequate medical attention, that you start filing either a lawsuit or a complaint, or the officer purposely does not do something for you when it's under his purview to do it. And so you file a complaint against them. There begins the retaliation. So you're walking one day, in one instance, a report writer, he may be walking, all of a sudden he's put against the wall. And so the officers start, pat frisking him a bit more aggressively than what is called a normal pat frisk. And so they may do the credit card swipe, which is when they will put their if you figure your hand like a karate chopping boards, well, that hand they'll put it up your butt like it's swiping a credit card. Now that would offend some people, quite frankly. And when they turn around to complain, that's when they get beat up. So I've seen that, I've seen it from both sides as well, quite interestingly, but more so with the correctional officers sometimes jumping people. I saw one instance that it troubled me. I'll tell you a quick story. I saw one instance where there was a correctional officer who I knew. I was kind of cool with him because he worked in the prison kitchen. And so, he let me bring out food and stuff like that. And I appreciate that. But on the other hand, he one day had an argument with a black inmate, and the black inmate, him got into it. So because the correctional officer says he's a boxer, they say, I'll give you a fair one. I'll give you a fair one. And so the prisoner got the better of him. So then they handcuffed the guy who had a fight with him on the fair one, brought him to an undisclosed area and beat the crap out of him. So, there's all these type of abuses that happen. I mean, there's the planting of evidence, meaning that if they want you out of a cell block, they'll just throw a weapon in there, and next thing you know, they'll come search your cell and it's already in there. Like you may have been out in the yard, but they already slapped it in there. And then when they'll come in, they'll come sell your search. And what's this? A weapon? And now you know how much trouble you can get in for finding a weapon. So these are abuses, constitutional, on all levels, that I've seen. And it's sad. But on the other hand, there have been correctional officers who are stand-up people to the extent that they're not there to make it difficult for people. Personally, in my case, I had some good favor because the publicity of my case sometimes helped me, or when they cell-searched my cell, they would find the kind of books I read, and sometimes that would give me a break. Other times it was declared a fire hazard for having too many books, and they would confiscate my books. So it was a lot of things going on. It's a very tense-filled situation of living in prison where you come to start feeling less than a person, less than a man, because you're under so much control.
So I'm going to turn it back to the positive again and talk to us a little bit about this arduous appeals process and the role of Marianne DeBari. And I understand you had like a little team called FBII.
Wow, you've been doing your research.
Yeah, definitely.
Whoa. We don't leave anything unturned.
Whoa. You guys, yes, the Fernando Bermudez is innocent. That's the acronym for FBII. And it really began with Marianne DeBari, leading the crusade early on, after my father found her. My father is first accredited with finding Marianne because he was referred to her by a German judge who worked in the parking garage. And so he always saw my father's sadness and hustle to try to find lawyers to help me. And one day he recommended Marianne DeBari. So she got on my case in like late 92 and never stopped, even until she passed, right when I bought my home in North Carolina. She always was a spiritual mother. She tied my collar when I graduated college as a free man. Oh, wow. She was just my spiritual godmother who wanted me to be a priest, but also a lawyer.
I'm really impressed that it was such a team effort and that everybody stayed with you and you were able to bring other people onto the team that really believed in you.
Yes.
That's good to hear.
I'm very grateful because the team grew. Marianne, the private investigator, my parents, my wife, all the reporters who were early on from 1992, like Claude Sonic, he always stayed on the case until it ended. And, all these different people, and they just grew and grew and grew, holding petitions, protests, rallies, giving a tape sometimes to the Manhattan district attorney that had my evidence in their hands, like waiting for them outside. Here, take this tape. This shows the latest news interview with Fernando. Help him. I mean, with people like that, Yeah,
that's incredible. Before I ask my next question, please tell me that you've trademarked FBII and it's on your clothing line.
No doubt.
Hey, I got to talk to the film guy who's the one who created the organization by name. I hope he did.
Yeah. That's got to be a logo on here somewhere, I think, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so here's my question around the 2009 hearing. You were offered an Alford plea. Tell our audience what that is and why it was used.
Yes, an Alford plea is one in which the defendant or person that's still under incarceration accepts the opportunity to enter a plea of saying that you can still be convicted, but that you're not saying that you're guilty or innocent. You remain. I mean, it's one of a position of that you can still maintain you're innocent, but it's not recorded on the record. So you voluntarily say that you believe that the state has enough evidence to still convict you, and that you accept that. And so your conviction remains, and then usually you get a chance to get out of prison.
And obviously you told them to take that plea and shove it.
That's right. I told them where the sun don't shine. That's right.
You gave them the credit card swipe.
Yeah. That's
okay,
what
so
happened.
Now, over in 2009, you've got your evidentiary hearing. It's sort of the big moment. But I understand that you had to wait for a bunch of weeks for a decision from the judge. During that period of time, where were you housed? And what was that like for you and your family, just awaiting that, basically the final verdict?
Right. Well, at that time, I was incarcerated at Sing Sing, so I was being shuttled back and forth to Rikers. So it's so interesting because after so many years, Rikers is still the same in so many ways. It's just a whole new generation of troublemakers or misfits or people who don't belong there. I'll leave it at that. And so it was a matter of just adjusting to the proceeding. I mean, let me file your question again. Please ask it because I got a little distracted.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I was just curious, I understand that you have the hearing and you had to wait for that verdict. Was it like a month or something?
I got it. Yes. So, right. So now again, I'm being sent back and forth, but the worst part of it was being stuck at Downstate Correctional Facility. So it's a midway state prison in between the Rikers and my main prison upstate. And there Oh, I was like starving. I mean, I'm talking about hungry. I mean, I was sneaking in bread in my pockets because you got 3 meals a day. You had to walk out to get them, and then it was a small meal. There was no food, no commissary, nothing. So there was no sharing of food. So it was very bad. It was no change of clothing. I had to wash myself in the cell. It was just bad being there waiting to go back either to Sing Sing or Rikers. It would be like a limbo, if you will, a purgatory, I guess.
So not only are you incarcerated, they're starving you to death as well.
Yeah, it was very bad. So then the best part would be when I go back to my Sing Sing, and I would wait there because at least I would know a lot of people and I would have more food. But then I would have to go to Rikers and then wait for the proceedings there as well, because sometimes there'll be a postponement. But yeah, ultimately I had to wait a month going back and forth. And it was like, wow, just stuck at downstate for a while.
Okay, so I want to frame this next question for you, Fernando.
Yeah, sure.
I want to move on to something, even more positive. So
okay.
I read, we read as we were reading about your story, and there's reading about it, and there's obviously experience in this, but I want to have you take our audience to some of the culture shock that you encountered when you were released. And if you don't mind, kind of tell us about your encounter with some skinny jeans, and then what you first experienced when you were released, and how that felt.
Yeah, well, it felt wonderful because for so long I had worn these state green clothes. And so now I had the liberty of being free. But yes, I was in shock over just the dramatic changes. Just being in a car felt so weird, floating by like that in society and seeing all the changes. And yet, when I got to my parents' home where we were celebrating, they told me that you needed some new clothes because the clothes I had were not good. And so they threw me some pants on, and they said, "Yo, put these on." And so I had trouble putting them on, and it was like stepping into the leotards. It felt like, and then I told the guy I had a complex, and I told the guy these things don't fit right. He goes, "No, that's the style, dude." I said, "They're all on my butt, man, my Dominican butt sticking out." And everybody was laughing at me and saying, "You got to get with it." And people walking around with things blinking in their ear, like lights. I said, "What's that?" People talking to themselves. This and that's Bluetooth. So I was just shocked. The technology had changed prior to me going to prison. They had no internet or computer technology, laptops as such. The cell phones were so big in comparison to the sizes I saw before me. In 2009, so much had changed. I was just shocked. The buildings were no longer the same the way they were. The people I saw who were little or I didn't remembered me when they were little. And so it was a big shock. It was a big shock to me.
Did the courts provide or the jails provide you with any resources for your reentry into society?
I was given nothing at all. I was just given $40.
There you go. Yeah, good luck, and there you go.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Well, and given that you were found actually innocent, why then was it such a grueling process to get that financial compensation that you deserve to get your life back on track?
Well, it's just like you have to go through another trial again. Unfortunately, you have to, in some instances, reprove your innocence on the level that it substantiates a lawsuit, or they're just going to battle you because they don't want to give the money. And this even happens in states where they even have paltry compensation. And that's even worse. But in my case, New York, they just fought me because I guess I was asking for too much in their view. And so I fought them. I fought them for 7 years before I got my first settlement. And it took a long time. 7 years is a long time when you're free. And I had no job. I had to support myself by cold calling universities, writing them, with emails of people I didn't know, asking for references thereafter if I made a hit with a lecture or university, and also working with New York's Innocence Project, who gave me gigs early on.
So I have a question. So when you're found actually innocent, theoretically, the whole thing should fall off your record, correct?
Yes.
So if you once you're found actually innocent and you go to apply for a job, I mean, technically you shouldn't have to say that you were convicted and have a record, but I'm assuming that it's not that easy.
Well, that's true, because you could say that you haven't been convicted of a crime, but it could still be on your record, unfortunately. Right. In some instances, even if you're exonerated, sometimes the court proceeding does not catch up with the state reflection of the disposition of your case.
Right. Just I assume that's not a priority for them.
Right. There you go. It's almost like they ain't going to do it for you. You got to kind of go in and do it yourself. So I've heard of people having that trouble, definitely, even after being exonerated.
So you're convicted of a crime that you did not commit. Then they won't give you the compensation, and then on top of that, you can't get it removed from your work record. It's like they own the ball, the bat, and the field.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's right. And no psychological counseling. I mean, I started realizing that I was acting strange when I got out. Like I lived in a controlled environment where it was very uncomfortable mentally and everything. But at least when I was in that prison cell, I had to deal with my own demons and all the fears and frustrations within that 6 by 9 foot cell limitation. Until the next day, I dealt with the public. But outside, I'm free, and now I could walk wherever I want in one sense. But I didn't feel like I could. I didn't feel like I had permission. I didn't feel like I could have money in my pocket, or a credit card. So any number of things that people, I think, took for granted, I still had trouble with adjusting. Even a shower, I would go in with my underwears and then wash them and then hang them up. And then I made like a line across the room, and they were all dripping. And my wife, what are you doing? What is this? These underwears hanging out on a line. What are you, in prison still? No.
That's probably I'm sure that probably took a while to shake.
Yeah. They said she told me, we have a washing machine. Learn how to use it.
It did sound like your plans before this craziness started, obviously to go to school and so on. It sounded like you were able to pick that up. Tell us about your impressive academic and other achievements post-incarceration.
Well, everything for me began inside, because the dreams that were deferred were just that, deferred, but I never stopped working on them until I can get out. So early on, I realized the power of education. I mean, from 1992 on, I never stopped reading or self-educating myself, even through the formal college education that I got in prison through the virtue of a scholarship. And so that helped me obtain an associate's degree. And then when I got out, I got my bachelor's degree in freedom. And so I got my bachelor's, I got straight A's. I was impressed by that to the extent that I was like, wow, look at this. If I applied myself, I could. So I learned things about myself, in other words, because prior to that, I was just only interested in school. For me, was a dating field where I tried to get as many girls in my zip code and beyond. I didn't care about anything else. That's the only subject I wanted to pass. But to apply myself revealed a different purpose, meaning, and potential. And so after that, I never stopped. After I got my bachelor's and before, I started lecturing not only in prison and teaching Latin American history and writing for the prison newspaper in prison, but when I got out, I started lecturing at universities. Again, cold calling places, writing places. I wrote the people in France. I used a translation service, and I translated my English to French, and they accepted it and invited me to speak in Lyon, France at the law school. I was like, yes, oui. Merci beaucoup.
That's
and
amazing.
So that's what I did. And I wrote some academic papers for for newspaper articles, always involved in lectures, lobbying to change the laws, if you want to consider that academic as well. And so I never stopped, and it has culminated in me working finally to finish my book. That's, I think, the cream de la creme of my academic work. Once I finished that piece right there, until I could move further into more adventures.
Hey, Fernando, I'm curious to hear about your interest in graffiti art and jiu-jitsu. Did I read that you actually trained BJJ in Brazil?
Yes, actually, yes. So, okay. Well, let's go to graffiti for a moment. Let's tunnel back in time, if you will, to use a train analogy. To describe what Hemingway said in different terms, a movable feast. To me, that was trains at 40 foot long, each would be moving canvases. And so I caught the graffiti bug early on because I was just fascinated at seeing so much rolling art and everything around me in my neighborhood and beyond, that at 12 years old, I started writing on walls. And I wasn't good at it first, but then I started getting a talent, and I got down with a graffiti crew, and we started writing throughout the entire 5 boroughs, on subway trains, walls, rooftops, anywhere we can get to. And that was just an adventure in itself, in that obviously we're not supposed to be writing in those places. And that attracted the eye of authorities, who would chase us, who would arrest us at times, the juveniles, let us go to our parents. And we would get into fights with other graffiti vandals, because if one graffiti group went into another person's train yard, that can cause trouble. Or if others were abusive, trying to steal the spray cans, that meant you had to fight. Or if people crossed you out of jealousy or envy, then that could cause a level of war, where if you saw the person, the most respectful thing to do, instead of dueling it out like in the cowboy times, where you just fought it out with fists. So that was my life until from about 82 to 1987, where I said, you know what, I'm 17 now, time to stop. I like girls more than graffiti. And so I started bodybuilding, and that became my next obsession. And then the next level to your question beyond the graffiti was what again? And the
jiu-jitsu and training in Brazil.
So now jiu-jitsu came as a result of, later on, when I finally moved to North Carolina in 2015, my family in here moved with 2 children. And my other daughter was living with her husband elsewhere. And I started doing a lot of planting, but it wasn't enough. I needed to do something. One thing I always wanted to do, I wanted to begin learning how to defend myself better. It was something I felt that I was deprived of because of my incarceration. And so one day I walked into a jiu-jitsu with all these big dudes and different colored belts, and got my ass whipped a little bit. And I realized that this was something I wanted to do, not only to humble me, but also to teach me this amazing skill where even a little guy could have an advantage over a big guy. So, and I started training it, and I did it for a little bit over 3 straight years in North Carolina with my son, which is also why I began it. I wanted to create a bonding experience with my son, so not only he could defend himself, but that we can journey together. And so for my birthday, I was still a white belt at that point. I wanted to take the Mecca, which was going to Brazil. Brazil is the Mecca of jiu-jitsu. If you go there, it's like getting knighted in one sense, especially if you go to the lineage of your school in America. So
were you in Sao Paulo or Rio?
Rio. We went to Rio. And this after the night of Carnival. Picture that, partying. Tum, 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 tum. You know how that goes. Everybody just, I kept the promise, and we went, and I trained on my birthday. And we had a good session in the hot academy of that place. And when I come back, my professors were so impressed. They were like, wow, you went all the way out there. This is usually a planned trip with the professor from over there. I guess it's a money-making thing. I short-circuited. Yeah, I short-circuited. I went on my own because it's just what I wanted to do. And I didn't know that there was a little, people get a little cutback when you book the airline and all this, whatever. Anyway, that's not my business. And so it was great. And listen, it was the best thing I did. It led me into a level of, I learned how to play human chess. I grew a level of confidence and physical agility and training that serves me well to today still. And it's something that after the COVID thing, I had to stop. Because now we have these restrictions on the gym. We're still in phase 2, which means people can't even be in the same room and all that. And it led me to an opportunity to discover myself in a lot of ways, which I think I've spoken to you about.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing sport. I think the word you stole my word, which was humble. I remember the first time I walked in and got my ass kicked and thrown all over the gym by these guys. And it is very, very humbling thinking that you're a young stud coming in there to do some battle, and these guys didn't even break a sweat while they're tossing me around.
Well, yeah, because I was a bodybuilder still at that time. So I'm a big dude, but these dudes, it's not about muscles. It's about technique, leverage. It's about learning to exhaust your opponent. An opponent can exhaust themselves if they don't know jiu-jitsu. Let's put it like that. And then that's when the person comes in and hits you with that coup de grace. Ow! Tap.
Well, beyond the jiu-jitsu and some of the other philanthropic work you're doing, what does your day-to-day look like? What's just obviously, I guess we need to reframe that because pre-pandemic, what does that look like, or what did it look like pre-pandemic? What fills up your day?
Well, good question, gentlemen. For me, it was also a matter of homeschooling my son. One of the main responsibilities, which began every day at 10:30 for me with my son, was homeschooling him for several hours in the home. So this happened for about 2 years throughout our jiu-jitsu journey together of over 3 years. And so he had got attacked on the bus. And so we had to pull him out to school, and then we started homeschooling him until we finally got a tutor to help offset some of the burden, because there's other things. And the other things I do throughout the day, apart from the homeschooling requirement, is just paying bills, studying personal finance, working on the book, reaching out, networking. What happened is that through jiu-jitsu, I got to admit, I had stopped my criminal justice work because it was so intense that it led me to not even want to do any more speaking or things like that, because I was just so preoccupied with this, surviving it, learning and stuff. But then afterward, it gave me a revival to begin again. So my day now, apart from having studied and going to training and all that, because it was training for 3 years, it was training a lot. Now it's just a matter of taking care of the outside, planting a lot of different species of plants and flowers and all that stuff. I'm always busy with that as a secondary workout and working out, and that's what I do, And now I'm doing the real estate now.
Well, I think you're definitely making up for lost time. That's quite a plate. I want to ask a question now. Day to day, what are some of the permanent emotional scars that you have to deal with? Like, what's something that in the morning or during the course of the day that is still from life on the inside that you have to deal with every day, if there are any?
Well, yeah, no, there definitely is. I mean, I always think about what happened every day. A day does not go by without thinking about what happened and trying to reflect more with gratitude than anything else, so that I could overcome any little feelings that that sometimes pop up of taking things for granted, even myself. Like, hey man, you're out. Why are you sad? Hey man, you got a little money now, so why are you complaining? Things like that. And so I try to kick myself in the butt as well. So I have PTSD. I'm going to tell you the truth. I wake up sometimes with a level of distress that only my wife can help me through, scratching my back and, other things. And so, I don't know if I'll ever be healed from this thing, because I deal with that. 2019 in particular was a very, very, very difficult year. I tried to change my antidepressant medication. I tried to do a number of things, and I was just so depressed, because one of the biggest wounds that I have, sir, is that, my family is still separated, alienated, not talking to each other because of the conflicts over my wrongful conviction, whether it's about money, whether it's about me not spending time with one group or the other, and me being so devoted to my family here that it's caused a grudge. So I deal with that. I deal with that every day, the separation of me dealing with this tension between, my wife and my family and things like that.
Where's you're in North Carolina and they're still in New York?
Yeah, they're still in New York. Yeah. And so my father never even came to my house in 5 years that I've owned this home. Now I'm happy to say I own my home for 5 years, and it's a paradise for me here. I'm about to go planting right when I finish talking to you. and I'm sad to say that because of all this mess, my father has not visited my home or been a grandfather to his kids, and nor has my mother. So it's the scars that I carry because of the resentments that happen because of this wrongful conviction, and the challenges that it still has for my family. It's the saddest part of my whole exoneration.
Well, Fernando, my friend, you are a true inspiration, and I think we need to let you go planting.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm gonna do it when I finish talking. Yes, when I finish talking. But if this is the if the conversation is closing, if that's a hint, I will say that I will say that it's a pleasure, definitely talking to you and the other gentleman there. I hope that the public understands that losing one's freedom is such a tragedy, having to endure this. But I tell you what, one thing I can say is that I'm fortunate to be alive, because now today, with so much police brutality and so much uncertainty, with what's happening in the world, that some people, based on police brutality, and I'm a victim too, based on what happened to me, don't live to even tell the story or become an actual individual agent of change. I survived and can tell my story. And so that's what I want to do. I want to continue being an agent of change, to continue developing ways to help humanity, to develop ways of making money using my brain in a way where I can help causes and do the right thing by creating a legacy that will continue the innocence movement, even when I'm gone.
Well, Fernando, the pleasure was all ours. Keep up the awesome work, and please keep us posted on all these wonderful things that you're doing to help the criminal justice system.
You have two fans. We think you're a hero. You have two fans here in Los Angeles, and it was an amazing story. And we really appreciate your honesty in sharing it with us. And I think our listeners are going to go crazy and really enjoy this. We really appreciate your time today.
You can't help but being a bit shook after hearing that.
Shook is an understatement.
Okay, I'll grant you that. As a matter of fact, I've been watching this show on Netflix, The Innocence Files, and those cases are so disturbing that I can only watch one episode at a time. And really, Fernando's case is just like those cases. I mean, it is appalling how easily someone can be swept into the system, have their life destroyed, not just by one bad actor in the system, but by different bad actors all throughout the chain of the justice system.
Yeah, I think that was the scary part, is that all of the safeguards that are in place to prevent this kind of stuff all failed. And I mean, if the police and the prosecutor are both in cahoots to get a conviction at all costs, what resource do you have?
I mean, that's true. There's instances where you could have the best attorney in the world, but if the deck is stacked that bad, there's just nothing you can do. That's
right. It totally is a David and Goliath scenario with all the resources that the state has available to them. And, what's also scary is that when all the new evidence came to light, it's appalling that it still took 11 appeals for Fernando to prevail.
Man, is it ever. I mean, how frustrating that someone can just one day lose their freedom with basically no evidence against them. Now, think of this scenario. What if you had a case where you had flimsy scientific evidence, or maybe even downright false scientific evidence? If that's not properly vetted and defended against, you've now got a situation where this kind of case would have an even higher probability of a conviction than Fernando's, where there wasn't even one shred of physical evidence. I mean, we've got a hell of a long way to go in criminal justice reform.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Mejil, and all the money in the world can't make Fernando whole again after that nightmare. But he sure is bound and determined to now live his best life and help raise awareness so that other lives can be saved.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, the flip side of this tragedy is the incredible bravery and just brazen persistence of Fernando. I mean, it's off the charts. And in his freedom, he's just not surviving, but it sounds like he's excelling as a husband, as a father, and as a change agent and educator in criminal justice. I mean, I just wanted to add that how many couples where one member is incarcerated, how often does the marriage survive decades after that? I would think it's pretty rare.
Yeah, it's got to be probably less than 0.1%. Yeah. That's something else that came through when we were interviewing him, was his sincerity and his energy that was coming through. I mean, most people would just go hide away somewhere and be beaten down by the process. But he was really positive through the interview with us, and I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, it's a testament to his strength because, I mean, he's plowing through. I mean, the guy has been scarred. He's been through a lot. He's still got the PTSD, but he's staying positive and he's got a cause and he's, really going after it.
Yeah, and on that note, and as a really good example, Fernando is about 75% through writing a book, and a film is apparently in development. To learn more about Fernando, check out representjustice.org. You can also find him on Twitter at Fernando Bermudez 6, on Instagram at Fernando Bermudez Free, and on Facebook at Fernando Bermudez exoneree, and professional speaker. You know, we really appreciate all of our listeners and social media followers and hope that you weigh in and tell us your thoughts on Crime Redefined. All episodes are now available at crimeredefined.com.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.